Hey guys, a lot of you have kind of mentioned that you're still feeling a little bit rusty about rhetorical analysis. So I decided to post a lesson video, kind of a step-by-step guide for how to write a good body paragraph, just to give you a little bit more support as you revise your paragraphs this week. So I'm doing this on the article that I posted on Classroom, Let Children Get Bored Again. And I've just posted here the rhetorical situation, the soapstone for this, so that everybody kind of has a good sense of what's going on. So you've got Pamela Paul. She's a writer. She's the editor of the New York Times Book Review. She's also the editor of all book coverage for the New York Times. The occasion, parents and schools seem to be getting afraid of letting kids get bored. We have a hyper-stimulated society and a lot of attention issues. The audience is parents or Americans who read the New York Times who might be afraid of letting their kids get bored, but who very much would value things like creativity, problem solving, resilience. Her purpose is to convince the audience that we should not fear our children getting bored, but we should see it as an excellent opportunity to train our kids to be more resilient, creative, and independent. Hence the title, Let Children Get Bored Again. So the subject, she kind of talks about the potential benefits of boredom that's going to help kids out. She's optimistic, informative, friendly. So if I were going to write a entire essay on this, my thesis statement, I would choose three strategies, tell my audience or my readers what her purpose is. So I might do something like she shares her own personal experience, she admits that life is often boring, and she cites the opinions of other writers and creatives in order to convince modern Americans that boredom is beneficial for children. So that would be my entire thesis if I were to write a whole essay, and each of my body paragraphs would be about one of those strategies. So my strategy that I've chosen to write my rhetorical analysis body paragraph on is the personal experience. So I've chosen the quote, "Some of the most boring jobs I've had were also the most creative. Checking out groceries at the supermarket, I invented narratives around people's purchases. The man buying eggplant and a six-pack of Bud at 9 p.m. Which was the must-get item and which the impulse purchase. How did my former fifth grade teacher feel about my observing her weekly purchase of Nutter Butters? I thought this was a really great example. Personal experience is so awesome for audiences to connect to the writers. And also this kind of has a little bit of a complexity to it because it also includes some rhetorical questions. I'm going to use that to kind of show you how to take this to the next level later. So the topic sentence of every paragraph that you write needs to have the strategy and also the purpose of the strategy. So my topic sentence is, Pamela Paul shares her own personal experience with boring jobs to illustrate the creative process that can result from mundane experiences. Yes, I do realize that illustrates is also a strategy, but it just kind of seems boring to say that she's sharing her personal experience in order to prove that boredom leads to creativity. It's kind of, well, boring. So I'm including illustrate, but it's not necessarily the strategy that I'm going to focus on. It's really the purpose. It's really what she's trying to do. She's trying to show us that the creative process can result from mundane experiences. I'm going to introduce my evidence. I'm going to go really simple with my introduction. I'm just going to say Paul writes. You could do a whole bunch of other things. You could tell us a little bit more about the situation. You could give us a little bit more of an elaborate introduction, but I just want to make sure that my readers know that what I'm including next is something that the author has shared with us. And there's my quote that I shared earlier. Then, according to the AP review video that we looked at last week, she suggests that we explain our example. Super great. This also kind of goes into reinforcing the claim, kind of how I talked about it in my example. So that would be the green section of this slide. So by including a few rhetorical questions in her example, Paul leads readers briefly through her own creative process, showing them that boredom can naturally give rise to creativity, a highly desired trait in American culture. So you can kind of see I'm going a little bit into connecting to the audience here, but that's just because it kind of flowed well. But what I'm really trying to do is I'm really trying to explain to my audience, okay, here's what she's really doing in this example. Here's what I really want you to know is the thing that she's really trying to demonstrate or to get at for us. So this is a really great opportunity for complexity. I have included in this example a few rhetorical questions. So this is kind of like when you pull out words and phrases from the quote that really show us how this kind of connects. The questions are super long, so I don't want to pull them out, but I can talk about how there are rhetorical questions in her example. She's using those questions to kind of demonstrate and show us what it might look like for us to respond to boredom in a creative way. So I'm mentioning that. I don't have to use it in my introduction, my topic sentence, because rhetorical questions isn't necessarily the thing that I want to focus on. That's not the overall, but rhetorical questions are part of that personal experience that really helps the readers to understand. So I'm including that in my explanation of the evidence. Um, I'm just mentioning it. This would kind of be like if your overall strategy was comparison, if an author is comparing this and that, and you include the quote, but you also kind of want to say that there's a simile there, you could mention the simile in this part of the paragraph, saying this simile demonstrates this, or this metaphor is really tying these two things together. It kind of makes it more specific and it makes it more complex. It shows us how these two things are working together. So it's a rhetorical question, yes, but that's not the overall thing. It's working with the personal experience to really get readers to understand how boredom leads to creativity. The next part, we're analyzing for the speaker and the audience. That was part of the AP video. I really just said connecting to audience, that both of them are cool. I wanted to focus in on this particularly because a lot of people I'm noticing are kind of missing out on the values and beliefs. So that's why I had you guys take notes last week on your articles to really think about what are the values and beliefs of the audience and what are the values and beliefs of the speaker. So if you'll notice on this slide, I've got some yellow highlights. Those are where I really think I'm trying to pull out the values of the audience, what the audience is going to believe, what those Americans are going to believe. So by making a connection to a trait that many Americans fear is dying out, so that's creativity. People are kind of worried that we're not as creative in America anymore, and I want to draw on that. Paul is emphasizing the importance of a very underappreciated activity. So that's also values and beliefs. We don't think that checking out grocery items is actually that beneficial. It's very underappreciated. And then I'm really kind of thinking about like what the reader's experience might be in my next sentence. That's why I've highlighted it orange. Perhaps readers might imagine a time in their own lives when they asked similar questions to keep themselves busy, but maybe they didn't associate that exercise with creativity. So that's where I'm really thinking, what's that connection? How is the audience gonna kind of relate to this experience? But then I move on. I say the questions she's asking clearly demonstrate an imaginative flair and an ability to consider perspectives other than our own. Okay, so this is really logos. This is a logical appeal. The audience can like physically see what's going on. But I kind of felt like saying, but she's making a logical appeal is a little bit too much. So I'm saying clearly demonstrate because I think that Americans really like it when they can see things for themselves. It's a clear demonstration. So you're kind of hinting at the fact that it's logical without like explicitly saying she's making a logical appeal. Reading Paul's story may convince readers that creativity is easier to come by than they thought, and that boredom is a valuable, almost natural tool to develop that trait. We'll talk about that sentence in a minute. Being a writer herself, it is easy to trust Paul's opinion since she may have personally benefited from her experience of boredom. So I kind of threw in a little bit of information about the author there, which is really helpful. So that's ethos, right? She has a reputation. She's a writer. It's going to make it easier for audiences to believe that what she's saying is true if she personally benefited. That's kind of why personal experience is so good. I could have said something like, because she's sharing personal experience, it helps the audience connect and it really shows, you know, she's been there. But I wanted to make it a little bit more complex. I didn't really want to stop there. So I kind of pushed towards that idea of her, you know, specifically benefiting, thinking about her as a writer, thinking about the things that she values as well. So that's really, those are some of the things that you can do. Obviously, there's no like straightforward formula about like exactly the kinds of things that you need to include. or exactly the step by step, here's exactly what you write. It's kind of like, in your writing, can you touch on these things? So you'll notice, like, I don't have all of my values in the same place. I'm kind of jumping around. It's a little bit of a mishmash, but it's kind of thinking about it as checking things off rather than following a map. So the next one, explain the persuasion. That's the part that I didn't highlight in the last section. The questions clearly demonstrate an imaginative flair and an ability to consider perspectives other than our own. Reading Paul's story may convince readers that creativity is easier to come by. So I'm really talking about her purpose, kind of her claim. I'm really starting to try to explain how this personal experience is going to help people to believe that we need to let our kids get bored. um, that's gonna that's where that's kind of like the final part. But you'll notice that I didn't actually make it the final thing in my paragraph. I ended with, being a writer herself, it's easier to trust Paul's opinion. So even then, you can kind of play around with that, and you can see how it feels. So when I'm grading your paragraphs, I'm not really looking for kind of that step by step, this is exactly the order that things need to go in. I'm looking to see, do you have some of those values and beliefs? Do you try to explain how the example that you're using is persuasive? Do you kind of touch on um, some of the ways that this ties in with her overall claim? So those are the things that I will be commenting on your work, the kinds of things that I'm trying to push you towards. So I hope that this is helpful, that you can kind of look at this as a way to kind of structure, or to help you to improve and um, add more complexity to your own writing.